There are a lot of classic insults at this point that people throw out when they're trying to make fun of AI tools, right? You might hear somebody call it a bullshit generator, or a lot of teachers will call it like a plagiarism machine. But one of the most enduring critiques of AI tools, or kind of more specifically LLMs or large language models, is that they work just as stochastic parrots, which is this term developed by researchers a couple years before the AI hype train really got rolling. The word stochastic, based on the Greek stochastikos, essentially means that it is based on guesswork, while the parrot part of it refers to the way that LLMs generate a ton of words without any underlying understanding of what those words mean. In other words, large language models look pretty smart, pretty capable, but their answers are ultimately probabilistic, right? They're not pulling factual information. But as researchers keep looking at AI and at large language models, they keep finding more interesting implications for this kind of stochastic potential other than just finding like fun memes to point and laugh at.
When I read about the idea of stochastic parrots, the idea that ChatGPT is just kind of algorithmically putting forth text without understanding its meaning and its context, I started thinking about how it's drawing people together around the text that it generates in the real world. And it might be doing so in some ways that we didn't intend.
That was Jamie Littlefield, author of Stochastic Publics, The Emergence and Ethics of AI-Generated Publics in Technical Communication. Even just from the title of the article, you can see how she's taken this idea of stochastic parrots and applying it to this larger idea of publics. But what do we mean by publics? What the hell does that mean? Publics is a concept in writing studies that is similar to something like an audience or a stakeholder, but also redefines the relationship between the person and the text that's being produced.
With audiences, you're kind of speaking to a group and you're just kind of transmitting the information. When we think about an audience, you almost think like of a stage. And when we talk about publics, we talk about kind of almost imagining a little universe, a little like group where people are combined and have the ability to do something. So I'm using it in a pretty specific way. When I say publics in this article, I'm talking about how you can create a text as a technical communicator, and then that text, through the people that you include in it, through the way that you write and what you write about, and the way you intend it to circulate, draws together a public or like a group of people, or sometimes things, around the text. And then those people, they don't always do anything with it, but they have the ability to do what Dewey says is conjoint action. So they may take actions through being a part of this group, being a part of this public, that they wouldn't have been able to take had they not been assembled in this way.
Jamie's question in the article is what happens to these imagined publics, to these like potential engagements when we work with AI. When we're planning out, we ask AI, hey, what would be a potential group of stakeholders or audiences or people that I should be thinking about? How is that list different than if I had just thought about it myself and spent the time, pondering the question?
When I create a document, I bring a certain intentionality to it. And the public, I might not be able to design the public to be exactly who I want comes together in the exact right way. But I bring a sort of human intentionality where I'm thinking through, hey, if I say it like this, it might bring those people to the text. And if I say it this way, or if I try to circulate it this way, then it might bring these other people, and these people might be together in this newly formed public. But when a computer does that, when we have an LLM like ChatGPT, we've introduced a whole nother mediator. I might have an intention when I'm writing a prompt, but then the AI may go off script and it may pull together people and things in entirely unanticipated ways.
When Jamie talks about the unanticipated ways that AI might change the intention, it's not always that they're changed in a bad way or even changed in a noticeable way, but that it's changed in a way that there are real limitations to the output that you get.
LLMs, especially ChatGPT, when we're talking specifics, they are trained on a massive data set, which you think, well, this includes all kinds of different people, all kinds of different, writing. However, if you think about what's on the internet and what were the most popular and therefore the most crawled and used websites in this training material, they tend to feature certain kinds of people. For example, Reddit was widely used as a source of early training material by LLMs. And if you look at the demographics on that site, it's largely like men of a certain age. And then if you had people talking about other issues that were important to other groups, they often didn't feel comfortable using Reddit. And so they would be off on some other corner of the internet, one that's less likely to be crawled or might be behind locked screens and passwords, to discuss the issues that were important to them. And so they're not appearing in the training data. So someone like, or something like ChatGPT is less likely to be able to understand or like conceptualize in its algorithmic capacity what these people were caring about, how they would talk, and who they are.
So I think it's possible for someone to kind of like listen to this conversation and say, yeah, so what? We get that the AI outputs are limited, or that ChatGPT doesn't have the full picture, its training set. But what does that mean for me? What does that mean for a practical writing situation? And that's one of the things I love about this article. In the article, Jamie not only talks about the theoretical implications for publics, but also a practical situation where she was trying to get community support for a crosswalk in her neighborhood.
So a few years ago, there was just an accident just 3 blocks away from my house where a little kid was trying to cross the street to get to the park on the other side, and he was hit by a car, and unfortunately he died. And a lot of us in the neighborhood were really concerned about that crossing. We definitely wanted to make sure that it would never happen again. And so we needed to petition the city. While we were thinking about how we were going to do this, we needed to hold some events where we kind of staged crosswalks and showed the neighborhood what it might look like, showed the elected officials that this is something that we supported in the area. And we end up creating flyers and social media posts. And I realized at the time we were creating publics with those documents, right? So, when we were putting out a social media post, it really, we needed to pay attention to who are we including, who are we not including, and then how might these people work together? Because, we might not have wanted to include, big media in some of these documents, because that might turn our little neighborhood issue into a big story about should the taxpayer have to fund this, where it would pull in people into our public who really weren't interested in like the concerns of our neighborhood and what we were working on, but really we're discussing they were looking at it from a different frame, and they wouldn't have wanted to work with us, and they might have dragged the project down. So designing these publics at the time was kind of important work for our neighborhood as we were advocating for a crosswalk there.
So with the stakes of that situation in mind, you say, I'm going to see how well ChatGPT can just do this task. So for the first part of the trial, when you give it the task of like, hey, ChatGPT, give me some publics, how well, what did you try asking it, and how well do you think it initially did?
Basically, I asked ChatGPT to give me a list of people who might be interested in a flyer advocating for a HAWK, or high intensity activated crosswalk, in Los Angeles. And I did Los Angeles just to give it a little bit of distance, because I had a little bit of an emotional connection to my own area. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, it did pretty good. It did what you might expect. It listed a lot of different players who would be interested in that kind of work. And off the bat, I mean, it wasn't a bad list. I'm not going to say that it did a bad job, because it didn't.
And she's right. It did a pretty decent job on that first try. We can even take a look at the response that it gave, that Jamie was so kind to pass on to us, and see that it not only, gave stuff like local community members or local residents, but also stuff like schools or educational institutions, so it's kids. Or even all the way down to just like there are pedestrian and cyclist advocacy groups that I would not have thought of that also could be connected to these campaigns. All of these build up the list of potential publics, of people who could potentially be involved with creating this crosswalk. But Jamie is also really careful to say that just because ChatGPT did a pretty good job at coming up with these publics doesn't mean it necessarily is always the best option.
So, but I did ask it, I said, why didn't you include certain groups or people? Because it acknowledged that, hey, I may not have included everybody that this would affect. And so I asked it why. It said something along the lines of, I tried to make the list based on traditional stakeholders, right? And that's where we get the idea of value lock. Value lock is what Bender talks about in his article about stochastic parrots. And value lock is when we get the same, we're taking the things from the past, we're remixing them, and we're pulling the past into the future over and over and over again, so we can never move forward, we can never progress. And that's sort of the problem with GPT's original answer, is that it used the traditional stakeholders, which would mean that maybe we always end up generating lists of traditional stakeholders. Maybe all the publics of the past become the publics of the future, and those publics become the publics of the next future, and we're not really able to move forward as humans in the way that we would want to.
To me, this is a much more interesting way to talk about the limitations of AI. Yeah, it's easy to cherry pick the dumbest answers that AI can give, or to show a bunch of, AI-generated art monstrosities and say, look how dumb this thing is. But I think it's more realistic to take an account for the fact that AI can participate in some parts of the writing process, like generating a list of publics, but that it will always be limited by the fact that its data is just reproducing the work it has seen before. So one of my constant questions is, how do we think about this, right? So if we do take a nuanced view to critiquing AI systems and not just calling out the dumbest examples, should we feel optimistic? Should we feel pessimistic? And in talking with Jamie about this, it was clear that it wasn't necessarily more positive or more negative that she felt after doing the study, but just that the skills of technical communication become all the more important.
Writing this did make me more optimistic about tech comm as a field. It scared me a little bit when AI came out and started generating texts. It's a writer in a lot of ways, and that's what I am, and that's what I'm hoping to teach, right? At the same time, though, I feel like it's making what we do so much more relevant and important. It's really showing that, like, our way of looking at technical documents and the things that we can provide to the field, actually, they really kind of do matter. And they're really needed right now because there's so much coming out of generative AI. There's so much to learn about it. And we have a lot of tools in tech comm and communication studies and rhetorical theory that can be applied.
When I reflect back on my interview with Jamie, I keep thinking about this term stochastic parrots. Like I said at the start, it's this term that gets used as the foundation, I think, for a lot of insults about AI and a lot of ways that we kind of disbelieve it, right? AI and LLMs don't produce new knowledge, they just produce more bullshit. But as Jamie points out, ChatGPT is probably somewhere in between fact and bullshit. It's flawed, but powerful. It's probabilistic, but it's also useful. And I think that deeper investigation into AI in practice is what makes Jamie's article so interesting. And that's been this episode of Talking About TechComm. Big special thanks to Jamie Littlefield for sitting down with me, talking about her article, spending time with me, listening to my emails, all of it under the sun. If you like this video, I strongly suggest you check out the interview I did with Stephen Carradini, who is the editor of this special issue. We talk about AI, we talk about TechComm, we talk about how do you wrangle a bunch of academics who may be all moving in different directions on a brand new thing. It's interesting. So I am also going to throw the list of articles and their links down in the description. So at the very least, I would scroll through those, check them out, maybe pick up one or two. And of course, if you want to support the channel, like, share, subscribe, little bell icon with the notifications, all of that good algorithmic philanthropy that you know and love. Other than that, I'll see you in the next video.